The first sermon he gave after enlightenment was not about God, not about the afterlife, not about the soul, not about the metaphysical structure of the universe or the identity of the divine, or any of the questions that religious teaching usually begins with. He sat down in a deer park in Sarnath, in what is now the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, and he gave a diagnosis. The way a physician gives a diagnosis, with the specific, methodical, completely unsentimentalized precision of someone who has examined the patient carefully and is now prepared to describe, in exact terms, what is wrong and what, if anything, can be done about it. The diagnosis had 4 parts, 4 statements about the nature of human experience so simple that they can be memorized in a minute, and so complete that the entire tradition of Buddhist philosophy, across 2,500 years and dozens of distinct schools and traditions, is essentially the elaboration of what those 4 statements mean. The first noble truth: life contains suffering. The Pali word is dukkha, inadequately translated as suffering, more precisely meaning unsatisfactoriness, the fundamental inability of any conditioned thing to fully satisfy the deep need that the seeking of it was supposed to address. The second noble truth: suffering has a cause. The cause is craving, tanya, the thirst, the relentless reaching for what we do not have and the clinging to what we do, the specific, structural dissatisfaction of a self that cannot stop wanting things to be other than they are. The third noble truth: the cause can be released. The cessation of craving is possible. The suffering is not permanent, not metaphysically necessary, not the irreducible condition of conscious existence. It is the product of a particular relationship to experience that can, with practice, be changed. The fourth noble truth: there is a path. The Eightfold Path, the specific, practical, completely unsexy set of practices and orientations that constitute the route from the diagnosis to the release. A deer park in Sarnath, 5 former companions who had abandoned him, now sitting back down to listen. A physician with a diagnosis. And a claim so radical, so counterintuitive, so completely opposed to everything the self-help industry has been trying to sell since the invention of the self-help industry, that most people hear it and immediately begin looking for the escape clause. There is no escape clause. That is the whole point. The modern world has a fundamental disagreement with the first noble truth. Not a philosophical disagreement. The modern world is perfectly willing to acknowledge, abstractly, that life contains suffering, that people experience pain and loss and the various difficulties of being alive. The disagreement is practical. It is about what the suffering means and what should be done with it. The modern world's position, embedded in its advertising, its self-help literature, its pharmaceutical industry, its social media, its entire economic architecture, is that suffering is a problem to be solved, that the appropriate response to dissatisfaction is acquisition of the thing, the experience, the relationship, the achievement, the body, the status that will finally produce the satisfaction that the previous acquisition failed to deliver. And when the acquisition fails, as it always fails, as it must fail, as the Buddhist tradition explains with mathematical precision why it must fail, the response is to acquire better, to optimize, to try again with a more carefully targeted version of the reaching that produced the last disappointment. The Buddha sat in Sarnath and said, "This is not a problem to be solved. This is the condition, the fundamental, structural, completely impersonal condition of being a conscious creature who is alive in a world of impermanent things. And the solution, the actual, genuine, philosophically serious solution, is not to acquire more skillfully. It is to change your relationship to the acquiring,
Siddhartha Gautama was born around 563 BC in Lumbini, in what is now Nepal. His father was a king, or at least a powerful chieftain, who, according to tradition, received a prophecy at the boy's birth that troubled him. The prophecy said, "This child will either be a great king or a great spiritual teacher." The father, preferring the king, arranged the boy's life to prevent the second option, surrounded him with pleasure, with beauty, with every material condition that might prevent the encounter with suffering that the prophecy suggested would trigger the spiritual path. The story goes that Siddhartha was 29 years old before he saw for the first time a sick person, an old person, a corpse, and a wandering ascetic who had renounced the world in search of liberation. 4 sights, and the sheltered prince left everything, the palace, the wife, the child, the kingdom, and went into the forest to find out what those 4 sights meant and what could be done about them. He spent 6 years in extreme ascetic practice, the other path, the path of self-denial rather than self-indulgence, the hypothesis that liberation could be achieved through the complete suppression of the body's demands. He nearly starved, achieved nothing that seemed to him like liberation. And then, in a gesture that the tradition calls the middle way, and that is in some ways the most important single act in the story, he accepted a bowl of rice. Neither extreme, neither the palace of pleasure nor the forest of self-mortification. The middle path, the path of engaged, attentive, completely clear-eyed presence to experience as it actually is, that leads eventually to the deer park and the diagnosis.
The first noble truth is the one that requires the most careful attention, because it is the most misunderstood. Dukkha does not mean that life is only suffering, does not mean that happiness is impossible, or that the pleasures of the world are worthless, or that the Buddhist path requires the evacuation of all positive feeling. It means, more precisely and more uncomfortably, that every experience, including the pleasant ones, is characterized by a quality of unsatisfactoriness that the seeking of the experience was supposed to eliminate and does not. The meal that satisfies completely and then ends, and the hunger returns. The relationship that fulfills and then changes as all things change, and the need returns in a different form. The achievement that produces the feeling of arrival and then recedes into the background, and the striving begins again toward the next thing that will surely, this time, produce the arrival that lasts. This is dukkha. Not the big suffering, the illness, the loss, the crisis. The small, structural, completely ordinary dissatisfaction that lives inside every pleasant experience, because every pleasant experience is impermanent, and the self that is clinging to it knows this and cannot stop clinging anyway. The Buddha's diagnosis is not life is terrible. It is the relationship you are in with life is producing more suffering than it needs to, and the cause of the excess suffering is not the world, it is the thirst. The second noble truth, that the cause of suffering is craving, is the one that the Western philosophical tradition has the most difficulty with, because it seems, at first reading, to be a counsel of passivity, of the suppression of desire, of the flat, gray, affectless non-engagement with the world that the word detachment sometimes suggests. This is not what the Buddha meant. The distinction the tradition draws, and it is the most important distinction in the entire philosophy, is between craving and preference. You can prefer that the sun shines. You can work toward the outcome you want. You can love deeply and completely without clinging. You can engage with the world, with its pleasures and its purposes, without the white-knuckled insistence that it deliver what you are demanding of it on your schedule
and in your preferred form. Craving, tanha, is the specific quality of wanting that is accompanied by the belief that you cannot be okay without the thing you want, that your well-being is hostage to the outcome, that the self, in the absence of what it is reaching for, is insufficient, incomplete, not yet what it needs to be. And this belief, which is not an occasional feeling, but the default operating system of the unexamined mind, is what the Buddha is pointing at as the engine of unnecessary suffering. Not the wanting, the belief that you cannot be whole without the thing you want.
The third noble truth is the most quietly revolutionary statement in the history of philosophy. It says, this can change. The relationship between the self and its experience, the craving, the clinging, the white-knuckled insistence that reality conform to preference is not fixed, is not the permanent, irreducible, simply the way things are condition of being conscious. It is a habit, a very deep, very old, very thoroughly reinforced habit, but a habit. And habits can, with practice, change. The word the tradition uses for the cessation of craving is nirvana, which has been so thoroughly misunderstood in the Western popular imagination as a state of blissful floating, a permanent vacation from difficulty, the spiritual equivalent of a warm bath, that it is worth saying what the tradition actually means. Nirvana means literally the extinguishing of a flame, not the extinguishing of experience, not the cessation of feeling or preference or engagement with the world, the extinguishing of the specific, burning, completely exhausting quality of craving, the thirst that drives the reaching, that produces the dissatisfaction, that drives the reaching again. Not the absence of life, the presence of life without the fire of compulsive wanting consuming it. Now the bridge. Because the Buddha was addressing a specific audience in a specific historical moment, 5th century BCE India, with its specific religious and social context. But the diagnosis, dukkha, tanha, the specific structural unsatisfactoriness of the unexamined life, is not historically located, is the description of something that most people, in most circumstances, in every era, can recognize from the inside. Most of us are living some version of the second noble truth right now. The craving that is organized around the belief that the present moment, with its specific configuration of circumstances, its specific configuration of what has and has not been achieved, is not yet sufficient, that the arrival is still coming, that the thing, once acquired, will produce the feeling of completion that the previous acquisitions have not quite delivered. And the exhaustion, the specific, completely ordinary exhaustion of a seeking that cannot find the permanent arrival it is looking for, because the permanent arrival, in a world of impermanent things, is not available, was never available, has never been what the seeking was actually for. The Buddha sat in Sarnath and said, the arrival is not coming, not as a counsel of despair, as the most liberating thing he knew how to say. Because the moment you stop waiting for the arrival, the moment the craving releases, even partially, even briefly, what is available is this, right now, the specific, unrepeatable, completely sufficient, present moment, which has been there all along, waiting for the craving to quiet enough to let you notice it. Here is what the Buddha asks of you practically today. First, identify your tanha, not abstractly, specifically, the specific form that craving takes in your life right now, the thing whose acquisition you believe will produce the completion that the present moment is failing to provide. Not the obvious cravings, not the ones you have already examined and named and worked on in therapy or in practice. The one that is still running unchallenged, the belief, held quietly, rarely examined, completely structuring your daily experience, that you cannot be fully okay until the specific thing arrives.
Name it. Without judgment. The Buddha was not interested in judgment, was interested in clear seeing. Just the thing, held in the light of the First Noble Truth, which says, this too will not deliver what you believe it will deliver. And the question is not how to acquire it more skillfully, but how to change your relationship to the needing of it. Second, practice the pause before the reach. The Eightfold Path is the Fourth Noble Truth's answer to the question of how, and it is a lifetime's practice, not a week's. But there is one element of it that is available immediately, today, without any particular preparation. The pause before the reach. The moment, however brief, between the arising of craving and the automatic movement toward satisfying it. Once today, when the craving arises, the reach for the phone, the food, the purchase, the reassurance, the distraction, pause, one breath, not to suppress the craving, to notice it, to see it clearly as the Buddha saw it, as a passing condition of the mind, not the permanent, urgent, identity-defining imperative it presents itself as. Notice that in the pause, in the breath between the craving and the reaching, you are okay. The present moment, without the thing the craving is insisting you need, is sufficient. Third, practice impermanence with one pleasant thing. The Buddha taught impermanence not as a source of grief, but as the technology of presence. The thing that is impermanent, if you allow yourself to know its impermanence, is the thing you are actually here for, actually present to, actually experiencing, rather than taking for granted as a permanent feature of the landscape. Choose one pleasant thing today, a meal, a conversation, a view, the specific quality of an ordinary hour, and hold alongside the pleasure of it the gentle awareness that it will pass, that this specific configuration of the world, this person, this light, this unrepeatable moment is temporary. Not to make it sad, to make it real, to bring to it the quality of presence that impermanence, honestly acknowledged, always produces.
Fourth, sit down. The Buddha's method was, at its most basic, simply this. Sit down. Be still. Pay attention to what is actually happening in the mind and body right now. Not what you think is happening, not what you fear is happening, not the narrative the craving is generating about what you need and why you don't have it. What is actually here? 10 minutes, today, sitting. Not trying to stop the thinking. The tradition is clear that trying to stop thinking is itself a form of craving. Simply watching the thinking, noticing the arising and passing of thoughts and feelings and sensations, including the craving, including the reaching, including the belief that the present moment is insufficient, as passing conditions of a mind that is, underneath the weather of its own activity, already complete. That completeness, not acquired, not earned, not produced by the arrival of anything, is the third noble truth, available right now, under the craving, under the reaching, under the exhausting, beautiful, completely human insistence that more is still coming. I want to close with a story from the tradition. Not from the Pali Canon, from the accumulated teaching stories that Buddhism has been generating for 2,500 years, in the way that all living traditions generate stories to carry their deepest truths. A student comes to a teacher and asks, "What is enlightenment?" The teacher says, "Have you eaten your breakfast?" The student says, "Yes." The teacher says, "Then go wash your bowl." Go wash your bowl. Not seek the extraordinary experience, not pursue the elevated state, not acquire the insight that will finally produce the arrival you have been working toward. Wash the bowl you used, with full attention, with the complete, unhurried, completely present quality of someone who has made peace,
not resignation, not the gray flatness of suppressed desire, but the genuine, hard-won, philosophically serious peace with the fundamental condition of being alive, which is that you are here, in a world of impermanent things, with a mind that will always generate wanting, in a life that will always contain both pleasure and pain, with no permanent arrival coming, with no final acquisition that will close the gap between what is and what the craving insists should be, and that this, exactly this, without addition, without improvement, without the thing that is still on its way, is the life, complete, sufficient, available to be fully inhabited right now. The bowl is clean. What happens next is not yet the question. Right now, just this. Just this. Here is the question the Buddha leaves us with today. Not from the palace, not from the forest, from the middle path, from the deer park in Sarnath, from the physician sitting down with the diagnosis, from the specific, completely unhurried invitation to look clearly at what is actually happening. What is the craving, the specific, unnamed belief that you cannot be fully okay until the particular thing arrives that is consuming the energy you could be using to inhabit the life that is already here? And what would it feel like for one breath, 1 hour, one ordinary morning to set it down and wash the bowl that is already in your hands? Leave that in the comments, because that answer, your noble truth answer, honest about the tanha and honest about what is already here, is not a small thing. It is the bowl, clean, and the morning it belongs to, which is this one. Just this one. I'll see you in the next one.